Uh, Welcome and good afternoon, everyone. Really glad to be here and share some of my experiences as an entrepreneur, and more importantly, wanted to share um, some of the things I've learned as to why it's really important for creators of technology, but particular education technology, to make sure that they're mirroring the backgrounds of their users as well. My name is Melvin Hines. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Upswing. Here at Upswing, our entire focus is on helping to improve the graduation rates of online and non-traditional students. And we do that by making it so that students who are, adult learners, student parents, first generation, online, basically people who don't typically look like, say, the typical 18 to 22-year-old college student, can still reach critical campus resources like tutors and advisors and counselors, et cetera. Um, and so I've been doing that for 8 years. Started in Durham, North Carolina. We're currently based in Austin, Texas. And a large part of what this talk is about is based upon those experiences that I've had so far. Um, so I'll go ahead and jump right into it. One of the reasons why it's so important for uh, you know people to think about the way that technology is being created and the importance of the technology that's being created is because there are a myriad of different users, and they all have different focal points, right? There's all different perspectives, there's all different ways in which people handle different types of products and services and et cetera. But if we're not thinking globally about how we're supporting those products, we can really begin to leave a certain number of people out as well. So here is actually a talk given by Tim Cook, another Duke alum, who was unveiling the Apple iPhone and some of the wonders of the face recognition technology that was going to be part of this iPhone that was coming out. And it was supposed to be, this revolutionary thing, and in many ways it actually was, but there were different issues that were taking place as well. For example, it turned out that when this came out, the iPhone 10 was not able to recognize different races of people very well. It wasn't able to recognize darker people very well. And what people started to kind of find out was that because the testing of that technology had mostly been based upon the users or the creators of that technology, which were mostly younger white males, the end result ended up being that it worked really well if you were part of that demographic, and not quite so well if you were basically anyone else. And this is just kind of one example of something that for the most part was harmless, but actually leads to some of the more real examples of dangers of technology when we're not allowing for all users to be considered in the tools that we're creating. Here's another example here. This kind of just tends to highlight another major, of course, product, Facebook. And of course, their biggest thing is their Facebook ad platform. That's where they make the majority of their funds. But what studies started to show was that their ad serving algorithm actually were discriminating against people based upon their gender, based upon their race. As you can see here, it was really starting to kind of skew ads that were, say, more blue collar ads towards a higher fraction of minorities. It was skewing some of the, ads for things like nurses and secretaries to higher fractions of women. And it was skewing ads for, say, home sales to higher fractions of white users. This was all happening through a very well-intentioned advertising platform that had very real consequences for the people who are users of this platform. So, oops, excuse me. So, just to kind of give you one other example, one of the things that I'm sure you guys have, well, none of us have probably been through too many airports recently, but going through TSA, I'm sure one of the things that you've noticed is that uh, when you're going through the scanning machine, they'll usually have a tool that looks kind of like this. where they're basically trying to identify if there are any sort of, metal pieces of tools or things like that that are on your body. But one of the things that they found is that Black women, particularly those who have braids and twists and other popular hairstyles, are actually being falsely identified as having some sort of threat or risk going through TSA as well. Once again, because the types of testing that was done wasn't making sure that all people were involved in there. And so this is kind of the backdrop of kind of where I was standing when I decided to give a similar talk at the ASU GSV conference a couple of years ago. ASU GSV stands for Arizona State University GSV, which is basically ASU's conference for ed tech leaders and folks, having anything to do with either education or teaching or student services outside of education, what have you. And one of the things that I was telling folks was that when I first was growing up in South Georgia, a small town called Albany, that had maybe 50, 60,000 residents. My mom and my dad were both going to college while I was in middle school, and actually in high school. And we used to drive up and down this road continuously, right? All the time. And so I began to know this road way more familiarly than I would prefer to. um, the reason why we're going up and down this road so often was because the nearest college that they could attend was about 45 minutes away, Georgia Southwestern State University. And so I would sit on the steps outside of the classroom doing my homework while my parents would be inside training for their programs. And I didn't understand why we had to do this every day after school, for what seemed like an eternity. Um, but one day I began to see what the impact of that was when I was actually able to witness my mom graduate from Georgia Southwestern State University at the top of her class. She ended up being the valedictorian and gave her valedictorian speech. And that's where, for me, it really kind of clicked the importance of education and what education can provide for families moving forward. I also knew what were all the difficulties that she dealt with trying to just get to that point where she could stand on that podium and accept that graduation diploma. And that was the reason why we created the tool called Upswing. Our whole goal was to create a platform that was going to make it easier for students like my mom to have the best opportunity to succeed without having to put in so much work. Typically, non-traditional students like my mom drop out at twice the rate as your 18 to 22-year-olds. And we wanted to figure out how can we kind of bridge that gap. And so I created a company that had three tools. One was a chatbot called Anna that would nudge students, give them updates, reminders, things of that nature. Then once we found out what students were needing, say, hey, I'm really struggling with this upcoming calculus exam, we had our student engagement platform. And that platform would allow for that student to then connect in with the professor, for example, or connect them into office hours or whatever other type of help, mental health, counseling, et cetera. And then for those folks who still needed help on nights and weekends, for example, we offer the 24/7 online tutoring experience as well. And so this is basically what we've been creating over the course of the last 7 to 8 years. We today have about 500,000 students who use our platform, and we've prevented nearly 50,000 students from dropping out of college. But here's where I'm most proud of. These are some of the stats of the students that actually use our platform, those 500,000. About half of them come from households under $30,000 a year. Nearly half of them are working while in college. They also tend to be skewed a bit more on the minority side. And what we've been able to do is really focus on online students and adult learners to help to get them over that hump as well. So, and here's just some of the types of students that we've supported, the ways in which we've created some of those supports. For example, a student who needs to drop a class but can't make it back to work or back from work in order to do so. These are just kind of a couple of the samples of the types of students we've been able to support. And all these are real quotes, by the way, that have come in through Anna. Um, and, our way of thinking about how we help people is by using things like our Think a Tutor program, where you can actually connect in with tutors, connect in with coaches, connect in with counselors to provide that type of experience for students. Um, so here's where things have really started to kind of, I'd say, help to support these particular types of students. We've so far been able to conduct over 245,000 sessions, as well as paper reviews. We've been able to see a 91% success rate among the students that are using our platform. And the number of students who are deciding that, college is not for them, or that, it's too difficult or too overwhelming, has actually decreased by about 1,000 students every single month among the students who are using our platform. And that really goes back to why this is so important to me, because I saw my mom, I saw my dad go through those exact same experiences. And this really kind of clicks from that one into the next piece here. So why is all this important? Why are the things that I'm talking about so critical, to this overall narrative that we're talking about here? It's because when you really start to think about who is supporting these types of students, as I mentioned before, nearly half of all of our students are Black or Brown. We have a very significant portion of students who are moms. You begin to ask the question of, okay, who are the people that are starting the organizations? Who are the people that are creating these technologies that are actually having that type of impact? Well, only 9% of all venture-backed organizations in the entire country are female-led. That's 1 in 11. And as we all know, half of the United States is female. Just 1% of all venture-backed organizations are founded by Black or Brown founders. Um, where Black or people who are Black or Hispanic and Latino tend to be around 25% of all people who are residents of the United States. So when we think about those numbers, when we think about how few dollars are being funneled towards technology that supports these types of communities and organizations, it becomes much more apparent how technologies that end up being sometimes uh, sexist or sometimes racist or other types of discriminatory aspects can really start to creep into the technology tools that we see today. What we really need to do is figure out how can we can focus more of our time, our efforts, our talents on ensuring that we are creating these technology tools that are being spoken by more people who have more disparate types of backgrounds. And in fact, there's a really interesting article that came out a few years ago um, from a company that was talking about how there's an empathy gap between teachers and entrepreneurs. Um, what I found that was really interesting about this study, and by the way, this is from EdSurge. It's called "What We Learned from Shutting Down and Rebooting Our EdTech Startup." Um, what they talked about was, teachers want to take their time to learn and integrate the tool into their practice. Entrepreneurs want to close the sale as soon as possible. At the end of the day, the teacher and the ed tech company are focused on very different performance metrics for their respective jobs. Um, I thought this was really interesting because I was actually a teacher before I started Upswing. I taught at North Carolina Central University, right down the street from Duke University, for about 3 years. And so having that experience really helped me with thinking about how I wanted my ed tech startup to better support teachers, better support administrators, better support colleges and universities all around the country. And today, when we talk to our schools and we ask them, hey, what is the number one thing that you like the most about Upswing? What they tend to say time and time again is your customer service and your customer support, that you get us in a way that other companies don't. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. For many different types of technology tools, the types of backgrounds that aren't being represented might seem, perhaps more or less harmless, but particularly in education technology, where this could really mean the difference between families finally being able to lift themselves out of poverty versus families being saddled with more debt and stuck in the same situation. It becomes that much more important for us to ensure that we're focusing on these things. And so here are some of the things that we've done here at Upswing to make sure that we're supporting our colleges and our administrators in the right way. First off, we've made sure that nearly half of our team um, is from different minority groups. We want to make sure that they're people who've grown up in small towns, right? Because the majority of our schools are community colleges. We work with a lot of HBCUs and HSIs. And so we look for those who have attended community colleges, look for those who've attended HBCUs or HSIs. And by the way, HBCU stands for Historically Black College. HSI stands for Hispanic Serving Institutions. And we make sure that the folks that we're bringing on are people who have had to fight through taking an online course. Of course, today that number is much higher than it was, say, a year ago. But that's really important to us as well. And those are some of the things that we're thinking about as an organization. So, how can we create the change that we need? First, we need to make sure that as we're thinking about technology and education with regards to technology, that we encourage an innovation-minded mindset within our classrooms. This is very critical because it shouldn't just be the idea that only people who say, live out in California and are in Silicon Valley are the ones who are thinking about these innovative tools. We should all feel privileged to be able to do so. And so, how can we create things like incubators and accelerators and focus groups? I actually started one here in Austin for entrepreneurship founders of color so that we can talk and find out what are the things that we're struggling with together and what are the things that we can benefit from each other. We should also make sure that we're promoting. This actually got cut off, but promoting and really helping to support solutions or apps that are founded by people that are representative of the types of people that are supposed to help. So when we're thinking about what products that we want to purchase or things that we want to kind of decide to promote, who are the folks that have developed them, and are they in strong relation to the folks that we want to have use them? That's going to be a really big question because otherwise we're going to see very, very huge gaps that are taking place there. And then finally, how do we hold companies accountable for representation in their hiring practices? This is critically important. What you'll find a lot of times is that among startups, um, the folks that are in the technology space tend to be overwhelmingly male. The folks who are in the startup space in general tend to be overwhelmingly white, and a lot of people tend to say that they just don't have a good pipeline of people of color to support that, and that's just not true. I would say that Austin is a very very white city, and we've been able to successfully find people of all colors, cultures, and races to be able to work for Upswing. And I think that we should make sure that we're holding other companies just as accountable to that as well. This is a time and place where usually I would ask if people have other ideas that they would suggest that they've seen work as well. But since we're in a virtual format, I'll just go ahead and skip over this slide and just leave you with this quote here, which is from Frances Frey. She worked for Uber for a pretty significant period of time, and she's a current Harvard professor. In a recent TED Talk, she said, diversity is not just on the burden of the diverse, it's an obligation for us all. And I think that that's critically important because I think that a lot of times, we only talk about diversity when it suits us, right? So, for example, perhaps you would expect me to talk about diversity when it comes to race, and perhaps you would only expect a female to talk about diversity when it comes to women. But it's actually an obligation for all of us. And one of the things that I tend to say is that any one of us who stands at the intersection of two different cultures, um, and we're in a position of privilege in that intersection, we have a responsibility to stand up and say the things that are important. So, for example, when we're talking about these types of groups here, these types of organizations that are taking place to speak to other people, and we know that there's a group that's being, for example, not well represented, or whose story isn't being told. This is the time period where it becomes incumbent upon us, people who have that position of privilege and power, to actually say something about it. And that's what's really and truly important, and what's going to actually move the needle if we're going to make sure that our tech tools and that our education tools that are supporting um, people from diverse backgrounds and people from diverse socioeconomic statuses are still being represented in the overall education and technology conversation. And so that's pretty much everything that I have for my talk today. Just want to say thank you for having me today, and would love to answer any sort of questions or thoughts that anyone might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Since it is a little bit of a small group, feel free to just like straight up like speak whatever questions that you might have or anything like that, or any comments, any questions, like personal experiences, whatever you want to share. So of course, you can also send in chat and everything like that if you feel more comfortable with that. But maybe in the meantime, I could kick it off with a question if that sounds good.
Sounds great.
So yeah, I was just maybe wondering if you could give some advice. So like, for example, for Ideate, we're kind of working with like a shortened time frame where, everything's virtual and like we have maybe like 12 hours or so to like for people to come up with solutions and everything like that, where they might not have as much opportunity to be able to reach out and get like diverse feedback and everything like that. So do you have any advice for how people can design with like inclusivity and diversity in mind when they come up with solutions and things like that? When I guess like the resources might be a slightly more limited, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Well, good question. I would say first and foremost, you know, the whole idea of where things go from here isn't going to end just with this shortened time frame that's here, right? So yes, it's great to come up with the idea. It's great to really try and pressure test it and see what works and what doesn't work. Um, but at some point in time, you're going to take an MVP of your product and you're going to bring it out into the wild. Um, at that point in time, the question is, who all are you going to be showing this product to? Is it just going to be people that you know in your network, and your network could be, um, all of one race, all of one gender, all of one sexual orientation, all of one socioeconomic status, right? Are you only going to pitch this to other college people? Well, if this is something that isn't college based, then you're once again kind of skewing the product, and that could end up being harmful to other potential users. And so that's how I would think about this, is that it doesn't need to necessarily begin and end with what you do here today. It should continue on throughout your entire iteration process. And more critically and more importantly, when you do find investors and you get that funding and you're growing your team and all that sort of stuff, how are you thinking about how you're growing that team? There was one education company that was founded they'll remain nameless, but they were founded in Brooklyn, New York. And they basically were trying to use rap to help students with English. So it's a very noble cause. But the first 20 employees that they hired were all white males, before they began to realize, hey, maybe we should think about diversity. My question, for them is, why did it take 20 hires before they decided that maybe they needed diversity for an organization that was focusing on providing rap music to inner city youth? So a big part of what you should be thinking about from day one is, what is that culture that you want to create? If you decide that you're not going to create your culture, someone else will create it for you. And so that's why it's so critical and important to make sure that the things that you want to see is reflected in how your organization is growing.
Awesome. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions in the meantime? Yeah.
A quick comment.
Yep, go ahead.
I attended this presentation because I have the opportunity to work on something with learning technologies with students over the summer, and I just thought this was like a really cool like, heads up for what I should keep in mind while helping with that.
Oh, awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, I really appreciate that feedback. Upswing today is so much different from what we were 8 years ago when we first got started. And when we first began, my whole focus was on wanting Upswing to be a kind of like a coaching platform for people in rural and southern communities, because that's where I grew up. And I thought, well, maybe if we could, a lot of times when folks become successful, they go to, I don't know, New York or LA or places like that. But what about these hometowns that are really small? And so maybe if I created a platform, I could connect people from those places back to these areas where they can't really find those mentors. And that's how it began, and today we still like have that as part of our kind of mission, but we've grown to become so much more than that kind of simple original premise. And so, Vikrant, what I would say is, as you're thinking about your learning technologies, um, what you originally think about is going to be critically important, but also speaking to and connecting with the folks who you're working with will be important as well, because we learn so much more, and what we've learned is continued to just impact what we're building. In fact, we just recently, about 4 months ago, added a new module to our platform that's specifically focused on mental health and wellness, because of everything that we had been learning from our students through our platform, that they were struggling with isolationism. A lot of our students were struggling with just the social unrest that had been taking place last summer, and their feelings towards that. And we wanted to find a way to help them. We wanted to make sure that people knew that they weren't that they weren't alone in all this. And just being open to kind of hearing what everyone is saying, and even as you're like moving fast, just making that time, you'll find to be really critically important as you continue to build your own tools.
Thank you.
Cool. Any other last minute comments, questions? If not, then, and if you do, feel free to cut me off. But if not, then again, thank you so much, Melvin, for coming today and just speaking a little bit about your background and, like how we can, design with all this in mind and everything like that. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, take care.
Yeah.